it's been browbeaten to death over the past few weeks, in my opinion. The bullying business in wrestling, the bullying and the browbeating people and blah, blah, blah. And everybody's taking sides. We're not going to litigate that again. I know you don't have a lot of fondness for one of the people involved here recently, but in all seriousness, it has taken on not only a life of its own, but it's gotten ridiculous. We're talking about grown adult men, folks. We're talking about supposedly professionals, but grown adult men. It's not cool. Kids bully other kids all the time in school, and whether it's the same age or bigger kids bullying little kids or whatever, there's where you bring parents or teachers or authority figures into things, because obviously it's kids. And it's never cool when men bully women, whether physically or just emotionally or verbally or whatever. And that's where, hopefully, the woman has a male figure in her life that can step in and straighten some of these things out. Or if not, then that's when you get the cops involved and the authorities involved. But in my opinion, seriously, we're talking about adult men here, and we have a megalomaniacal lunatic in the White House that's about to enter us into nuclear war, and we're worried about people not even physically bullying other people, not the old Dynamite Kid stuff or some of the, and we're not even talking about shit like Johnny Valentine putting, lighter fluid in Jay York's asthma inhaler and the real or Mr. Fuji having a guy's engine taken out of his car type of ribs. We're talking about promos being cut and things being said to people and browbeating, jousting, as Arn Anderson used to say, in the locker room amongst grown adult men. And I've taken that opinion that there ought to be some way they can settle it amongst themselves. And I've never been in favor of going to the office. I'll tell you, before I tell my personal stories, I remember one time, this was after I was gone from OVW, but I obviously was still here in Louisville and spoke to a couple people involved. And there was one young man that I had started working in OVW, had been signed by the WWE to a developmental contract when he was just maybe not out of his teens or barely out of his teens. But he was a big kid and he had all the potential in the world. And he had a bad attitude, and he thought that, he was just being an asshole to some people, some of the boys. And so one day that guy goes out in the parking lot, and there's one or two of the other boys letting all the air out of his tires in his car. He said, "Hey, what are you doing?" I said, "We're letting your air out of your tires." "Why are you doing that?" "Because you're an asshole." Well, are you going to help me blow him back up?" "No, we won't be doing that because we mentioned you're an asshole." And they walked off and left him with flat tires. Now, at that point, that young man could have done one of two things. He could have said, "What the fuck have I been doing and how have I been acting that would make, these guys, want to fucking do this, and maybe I'll straighten it out or ask somebody or whatever. Or I can go whine to the office." Guess what he did? He went and whined to the office, not to the OVW office, because I've had to mediate some things. I had to make Brock Lesnar apologize to several people. Star Maker Bolin, my wife Stacy, and one of our referees being one of them, three of them. But he didn't go to the OVW office. He went to talent relations in the WWE. And of course, since they had no idea what the fuck was going on, and because they're all fucking pussies and scared of being a publicly traded company, they threatened to discipline the guys that let the air out of the tires instead of asking the guy, "Well, what have you done to get this response?" And so what happened was then most of the guys ignored him. Nobody fucked with him anymore, but they also ignored him. Nobody went out of their way to help him. He didn't adjust his attitude. He got taken up to the main roster. He got a rotten gimmick. He had a few other attitude issues. And by the time he was in his mid-20s, he was finished as a talent in any major league wrestling promotion and wrestles very little, if any, to this day. Sometimes these things sort themselves out if you just stand up for yourself, and if you nip it in the bud, or you just show that you're not going to be fucking victimized by this shit. And now everybody said, "Oh, well, Cornette, Bradshaw wasn't going to bully him because he was in the office." Or say, Cornette was a booker. Well, I started too. I was the fucking teenage boy photographer at ringside for years until finally I got involved as a manager. And no, they didn't bully me as a photographer because, for one thing, they were all making money off of me and getting publicity off of me. But when I got into business, that was a different story. And it wasn't about, once again, although Jerry Jarrett has perpetuated the story that he said, well, I got Cornette in the business because if he could get as much heat with the fans as he did with the boys, we'd all make millions. But for example, my first year in the business, I had to wrestle with no training whatsoever. I was thrown in the matches. I can remember having lumberjack matches where it was one of these is even on Jim Cornette, the rookie year, that you can get at jimcornette.com. But it was me and Adrian Street and Miss Linda against Dundee, Bill Dundee, in a lumberjack strap match where they put 4 guys around the ring with straps. And if you took a bump out of the ring, which obviously at various points you would, the baby faces would whip the fucking heels. Well, Jerry Lawler wasn't going to fuck with me because he just wanted to get done with it. Dundee was the booker, and he booked that match to begin with, and Lawler had a main event to do. And Terry Taylor wasn't going to fuck with me, and Stan Lane maybe a little bit, but Steve Kern. Not only did Kern have the belts that the office handed out, but he would get the belts from the fans. We turned around this one time in Memphis in this particular match, and he had one of those goddamn thick leather belts that the Cowboys used to wear with metal studs down each fucking side, right? So 2 rows of metal studs. And he was whipping the bejesus out of me, especially. He was lighting up on Linda. He was working with Adrian, but he was whipping my ass good. And we had about 10 of those in the course of 2 weeks. And after the first one, I was smart enough that I not only wore wrestling trunks, but 2 pairs of sweatpants and 3 T-shirts. And by the end of 2 weeks, I still looked like Hamburger. I had welts. I was purple and black and blue, and the kind of welts that would ooze blood out. It wasn't just, fucking around. What was I going to say? Was I going to fucking quit? No, I wasn't going to quit. And I wasn't going to go stooge the booker because he was in the fucking match. As a matter of fact, in that same match, Dundee, I can't say that he ever potatoed me on purpose because that's where Ricky Morton originated the phrase, Bill, please punch me in the face as hard as you can because your working punches are killing me. But Dundee grabs me, and since I wasn't a trained wrestler, he just threw me out of the fucking ring. And I had no choice in the matter. And when I was going so fast, I hit the middle rope. It snapped me upside down. Side of my face hits the edge of the ring. Boom. The cheekbone cuts inside out because it's sharp. By the time I land, my cheek is laid open to the bone. It took about 18 stitches, 6 on the inside, 12 on the outside. I'm bleeding like a stuck hog. Made Terry Taylor sick, as a matter of fact. And I got back in and I was a little lit up. And I gave Dundee a few stiff shots. What's he going to do? Complain about fucking, the manager fucking being stiff with him. But afterwards, I go back in and I'm hot. And so I go over to the fucking babyface dressing room where Dundee's giving somebody else a finish. And I come in and said, Bill, goddammit, I don't know how to take that bump. And he proceeded to cuss me out for 5 fucking minutes for interrupting him while he was giving a finish while I'm standing there gushing blood. Did I quit? Did I run to Jerry Jarrett? No. I said, all right, I'll get a chance to fucking get a few receipts in, which I did as a heel manager against one of the top baby faces. But a year later, Bill Dundee was the booker in Mid-South Wrestling, and he was using me as the top manager, and I was making $100,000 a year. So it wasn't really that big a deal. But if I'd have fucking said, oh, God, or with the Fabs, me and Jimmy Hart, they used to do the manager cage matches in Memphis. Well, when a manager was in the 7-foot-high steel cage that was about 4 feet square, if there was one manager in there, the spot for the baby faces to always do was push the fucking cage over, and that got a big pop from the people. And it generally also was a hard bump to take and protect yourself, but you could hold on to the cage and you could, whatever the fuck. But one night we're in Memphis and it's me and Hart both in the cage. And Jimmy told me, he said, those fucking Fabs are going to push that cage over. We got to ask them not to, because with both of us jammed in there, there was no way to protect yourself, right? And you're on the concrete floor. So we went and we said, guys, please, there's 2 of us jammed in there. Don't push the cage over tonight. So me and Jimmy are in there and we're very close. We had plenty of time to get close, me and Jimmy, that night, because we're jammed up against each other. And then here comes Stan and Steve. And he said, they're going to fucking do it. Hold on. And they pushed it over and poor Jimmy was on the bottom. And thank God he had elbow pads and some shit, but it hurt. It hurt bad. And he was all black and blue and it hurt me and I was on top of him. And I was hot. And I go back across once again. After we get back, I go back. We were managing Bob Eaton and Duke Myers that night. And I go back around to the fucking babyface locker room and I asked Stan and Steve, I said, hey, what the fuck, guys? We asked you not to do that. That fucking hurt. And Steve was like, oh, we forgot. All right, well, next time I get a chance to get a receipt on you, I'm going to forget too. And then I ended up, having a wonderful relationship with Stan when I was his manager. And in Crockett, I was still a kid. I was 25 years old. We got the double Charleston rib one time, where one night was Charleston, West Virginia, and the next night was Charleston, South Carolina. So that was 200 miles from Charlotte to Charleston, South Carolina, 200 miles back, then 240 miles to Charleston, West Virginia, and 240 in 2 days, in the middle of working every day. And I got back from Charleston, South Carolina, and I had a cold anyway, and I woke up the next day and I'd hit the wall. And I just said, fuck, I can't. I just fucking can't. I don't care what happens. They can set me on fire, fire me. I don't care. Everybody did that. Dennis used to take every once in a while, a couple of days, and finally it took forever. But everybody in the business in those days, when you worked 100 days in a row, used to, every once in a while, they'd disappear for a day or two. And so I fucking told Bobby and Dennis, I said, tell them I'm fucking sick. I ain't going to Charleston, West Virginia. So the very next day, we're somewhere else. And Tully back, of course, now we're all good and Tully's mellowed and etc. But back then, Tully was an abrasive personality. And the reason why is I think he was around, Flair loved him, and everybody else wasn't exactly, Arn wasn't even particularly warm on him as a person, but everybody respected him as a great wrestler. But he was abrasive, be a bit prickish. So when I come in the following day after I'd missed Charleston, West Virginia, Tully took it upon himself to be the locker room fucking policeman and starts browbeating me. Where were you? I said, I was sick. Oh, you don't think we ever get sick? We still show up. We don't. And he kept on. And finally I said, Tully, are you the fucking booker? Because if you ain't the fucking booker, it ain't none of your business. And he got hot because I said that in front of the boys, and he goes to slap me. But he telegraphed it, and I did a perfect John Bones Jones fucking lean back, and fucking he swung and he missed. And several people said, hey, and and at the same time, I was not going to win that fight against Tully. But he couldn't whip either Bob Eaton or Dennis Condrey individually, much less together. And so he stormed out of the fucking locker room, and we ignored each other for a few weeks, and then everything was fine. Nikita Koloff. He decided the Russian Nightmare, right in the early part of 86, when all of a sudden the Rock and Roll in the Midnight got pushed ahead of the Russians and et cetera on a lot of the cards and were drawing money. Nikita used to browbeat me in the locker room about whatever. And okay, fine. Because Nikita and I and we're great. I saw him in West Virginia fucking last year and we hugged, and he's all religious and everything. And there's no problem. But at that point, he was juiced to the gills and ready to snap at any minute. And so one night in Cincinnati, he's fucking riding me about whatever the fuck. I can't even remember. And finally he'd finished and got his punchline out and everybody's laughing. So I had to, and see, they learned not to joust with me too much verbally, because if they weren't going to fight me, which was a losing battle, because if they beat me up, then who did they beat up? They beat up the fucking manager. And if they didn't beat me up and I fucking zinged them and they didn't come back, then it made them look bad. So there was somewhat of a moratorium on this, but Nikita just kept going. And finally, when he got finished, I had a fucking comeback, and I started to do the comeback, and he said, oh, shut up. I said, no, you shut up. I said, you had your turn. Now's my chance. And he fucking gets up, and I'm thinking, well, he's going to come over here and knock me out. And he wanted to, and you could see it, and he fucking swung. And as I started to duck, it was more like it was an open hand cuff to the side of the head, just like, because what's he going to do, knock me out? Then he's probably going to get in trouble. And he storms out of the locker room. And I think Flair's told his story that he had to go to him and say, what the fuck are you doing? Leave him alone. He's here drawing as much money as most people on the fucking card. And there's no reason for it. But Nikita, as did I mention, was all juiced up at the time. But you do that. The guys used to do that. That's how I got over with Ole. When one time after the Great American Bash 86 payoffs came out, and Baby Doll and I were on the cards in a more prominent position than Ole and Arn. And he was sitting there one night, and he said, well, God damn it. I never thought I'd give 20 years of my sweat and blood and life to the wrestling business to be on cards and make less money than a faggot manager and a fat cunt. And I said, and Ole, just on behalf of the fat cunt who's not currently here, the faggot manager would like to thank you for spending 20 years in this business and prepping it so that we could come in and make those huge fucking checks. And he liked that. And he started easing up on me because he liked people to fucking joust with him and come back. He didn't want to just fucking make it one-sided. You have to stand up for yourself one way or the other, for fuck's sake. Or, you know, you get a receipt later or joust with somebody or whatever. And it's a whole lot easier than it used to be. People are scared now to offend most people to begin with. And the guys don't joust that much in the locker room. It was hard. Those days were like being in a fucking locker room with the fucking 15 most vicious insult comics that you'd ever goddamn seen. And you had to hold your own, but you also have to stand up. And I said before, if somebody's fucking with you, and this is just blanket statement, if somebody's fucking with you so bad that you want to either quit your job or do something bad to yourself or whatever, take them over in the corner and say, look, this ain't going to fly. It's bothering me. We're going to do something about it one way or another. Then one of us is going to jail and the other one's going to the hospital. Everybody's going to get in fucking trouble. Let's just agree to ignore each other. If you don't do that first before you go to the booker or the fucking office or whatever, then I'm sorry, but, you know, you got nobody to fucking blame. That's just my opinion.